Hello, we will be exploring the Hermetic axiom today, as above, so below, as within, as all about, as the universe, so the soul, or as the soul, so the universe. And I'm going to be reframing the soul for this into the spirit, because when I refer to soul, I'm usually referring to the astral emanation that is this particular being and that all beings in form have. Form being a loose term there. This axiom is an opening up of the toroidal field. So we want to look at this from the standpoint of development and ascension. So we begin with as above, so below. Usually this is explored from the standpoint of heaven found on earth and fractals of development. And we will get into this in a later phase of this particular phrase. As above, so below. We can also look at this as to the left as to the right, as in front as behind. This is an allusion to the 6 directions: above, below, left, right, forward, backward, and the spatial relationship to the 6 directions as the 6 directions. So space, what is around us? What is in the environment? We want to recognize the 3 dimensions of space, and this is where this starts. And so, because we're working with space, we begin to explore the sense gates. So we use the sense gates. What do I see in the space around me? What do I feel in the space around me? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? What do I know? And this is all in relation to spatial awareness and the tensions of space. And this is such a vital part of what individualizes us and allows us to sustain a living form, right? Form is of space, and form is a necessity for function to carry itself out, right? Function informs form, and form gives an opportunity or a vessel, the waters for function to carry themselves out. So, as above, so below, we're working with space, we're working with the senses. We're recognizing the 3-dimensional aspects of the environment around us and of ourselves. And based off this axiom, as above, so below, we begin to start blurring the separations. And this is done from this phase of the axiom, from the perspective of the observer and that which is observed. So the observer is separate at this phase of the training. The observer, say, is observing the tree. The practicer is observing the tree, is different from the tree, is recognizing the space between the observer and the tree, is recognizing the space of the tree, and then starting to begin to recognize how the tree might be the same thing as the soil beneath it. And you're starting to recognize how the form, all the form aspects of life, the minerals, the liquids in the soils, on and on it goes, make up the tree. So the tree is a representation of, say, at the physical level, the minerals, the waters, the gases, and the carbon, everything that's being harvested from everywhere is represented in the tree. And if we want to begin working this from a practical standpoint, you would, of course, breathe life force. You would then start pore breathing this. You become the field of life force, and you start looking at and perceiving through the sense gates the life force of the tree. And we start to recognize, as we blur above and below, as we blur left and right, as we blur in front and behind, that the life force that is of the tree is the life force that is of the bird, is the life force that is of the waterfalls and the animals and the fruits, and on it goes, right? Everywhere your mind can explore, this is recognized as one life force, we might say. So we're recognizing this from a separative standpoint. I am recognizing life force. I perceive the field of life force. I have a field of life force. The tree has a field of life force. The life force that is in the tree is the same life force that is in the bird. And we start to be able to feel this tangibly. So we start to, from the depth of experience, begin to understand spatial connection and interconnection. Okay? And this starts to be perceived as an amalgamation of like brighter life force in these shapes, kind of like in the Matrix when Neo's seeing the code, and he sees the brighter code is where the amalgamation of life force is that makes up that particular life form. And that is what we're looking at here, right? And once again, this is still from a separative identity standpoint. Okay, so that's the first part, as above, so below, looking at space and direction. Now we have as within, as without, or how I've done it here is as within, as all about. So this is now breaking open that recognition of that which is that which is the observer is that which is the observed. So we're breaking that separation and that identity split. So here we recognize the self-referencing of space, how we're using the sense gates and space to reference ourselves and ourselves to reference space, and we start to blur that identity line. And that is what's happening here, is we're blurring identity, not just blurring perceptions of reference point through the environment, but also blurring ourselves as a reference point, as within, as all about. So as we blur the identity, we start to have the experience when we're practicing, say, that tree qigong, or any work when we're walking around, we're out and about, and we're pour breathing through the field. We're field breathing the light of life force, whatever you might be working with, and you start to recognize that, of course, the field that is the tree, the life force field of the tree, is the life force field of the observer. They become one field, right? As within, as all about. The tree and myself are the same. So there's one field of life force. And this, of course, is worked through beginning to, the body dissolves when you're practicing into that field of life force. And then through the practice of recognizing, in the first phase of this, the tree's life force, and how the tree's life force is the same as the life force of the other trees around it. It's just consolidated in all these different places, and we start to recognize that we are of the same life force. So this begins to really, at a deep experiential and tangible level, blur the lines of that which is ourselves and that which is everything else through the environment. So the tree is my field. I am the tree's field. One field, right? I am the tree. I am one field, one life, one light of life force. And this is the sort of realization that occurs at this stage. So we're using an interesting paradigm here, which is that we are working with, through this axiom, the release of space first on the path of initiation. Typically, or more commonly, the release of time comes first. So with this, the release of space is coming first. The release of the tensions and the habits and the addiction to spatial reference points. Okay. So from a training standpoint, we have all kinds of exercises that we can do to explore this. And the reason this usually comes after time is that it can be harder. It can be a little bit more refined, and it can be more difficult to tap into how the mind is clinging to spatial relationships and to soften those out and feather those spatial relationships out. That's why it usually comes second. But for the purposes, again, of this little saying, it's being discussed first. So any exercises that involve the blurring of those spatial lines, the blurring of identity shapes that can fall into this category. And there's many, many training mechanisms that do this, everything from deity yoga practice, right, where you're creating the deity and you're, say you're working from an evocational standpoint, you're working from initially outside you, you evoke the deity, and that entity is formed outside you, and you build that, you work with it, you work with all the qualities, the reverence, devotion, sacredness, on and on it goes. And then the next phase is where you bring that entity, that evoked entity, inside, and it is invoked, and you merge with and become one with that entity. The inside and the outside become one. That is the second phase, as within, as all about. So this is found in many different spiritual systems and traditions that are helping us to begin to bridge and merge the inside with the outside, and to come to this understanding, this tangible recognition of mergence. So this brings us into the last little part of this, the last line, which is as the soul, so the universe, or as the universe, so the soul, as the cosmos, so the soul. And again, I switch this for as the spirit, so the universe. And this is where we begin to break time, as far as this saying goes. So, in the first part of this, as above, so below, we have the 6 directions, the sphere, the expansive awareness of this sphere that's going out. And you can even look at this as like the Kabbalistic makeup from the dot. You know, you have the line, and if you want to have a reference point, you have that circle that's built for that sphere. And then at the edge of that sphere, you put another point of, you make that a center point, and then you have another sphere. That's where the tree of life starts to blossom out of this understanding. And this happens once again in very tangible ways in the meditative process. So, as above, so below, 6 directions, a sphere. As within, as all about, there is recognition of the center and circumference of that sphere and blurring those, right? And then, as the spirit, so the universe. This is where the center starts to fall through itself into the Akasha. Center and circumference become one, meaning that ultimate expanse is expanseless, right? You fall through the center into infinity. So the circumference and center are the same thing, meaning any part of the circumference is a center for any other circumference, which is a center. And this is what I usually refer to as a peripheral node. The center, central and peripheral nodes. The central node falls through itself and is all peripheral nodes. So that is where we begin to get to in this part of the saying. As the spirit, so the universe. Recognition of 4 dimensions now comes into play. Recognition of time, recognition of space. This, we could say, is the light consciousness of life force from a more condensed standpoint. So this might be, from a practical standpoint and a practicing standpoint, you are beginning to blur the individual life forms from the time relationship. So the tree is not only observed as the life force in the field of the tree. It's not only observed as one, right? I am the life force, this field which is the tree. But time breaks, so that tree is seen as it falls through itself, through the fruit, into the seed, into the growth of consecutive trees, into the expanse of that through, many trees, many peripheral nodes, dropping many central nodes, which are peripheral nodes, and this constant expanse through space, through time, which can collapse and expand. So we continue with this exploration, and we find that within this is a whole initiatory phase of the practice. So the forms of life, the birth and death references start to dissolve, right? That's very important. The birth and death references start to dissolve into the Akasha. And that's what we're working with here. That which is infinite in space is also infinite, we could say, in time, or eternal and infinite. Timeless, eternal, and infinite, spaceless. Okay? Recognition of time and space, of 4 dimensions, and this is done through the eradication of attachment to time. So we begin to fall through the torus, through the center, which is the circumference, through the center, which is infinity. And we start to find that we are part of that timelessness. We are part of that spacelessness. Reference points of this particular identity in time dissolve in the same way that reference points of this identity to space dissolve. And that is one of the big things we're working with here. This brings us into the fractal light consciousness perception, right? And how life and consciousness express through energy information in very fractal ways. And this is then seen as it spirals out from the atom through the, each individual consciousness layer that makes up an amalgamation of the next consciousness layer. And this goes out through the solar system, through the cosmos, through the constellations, boom, 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 boom. And we start to find, once again, back to that fractal standpoint in the beginning, as above, so below. And so you take this saying and it starts to spiral through itself as a process to more and more refined, infinite, and eternal perceptions and understanding and realization of the fractal infinity and the fractal eternity. When we're working with time and exploring time, we're looking at those life forms, we're looking at the yin and yang, we're looking at the becoming of that life force, becoming that life form, and the unbecoming, the life force falling away from that life form. And this can be explored from the standpoint of, we could say, like a negative entropy as the form takes hold and is existing and continuing to exist, and then that entropy factor. So time, and the way we know time is typically through the yin-yang, through the becoming and unbecoming, and what's happening during those phases. So the Akashic eternity, the Akashic infinity, and this, once again, timeless, spaceless, is the refinement of ascension, which has nothing to do with up, because up is down. It's nothing to do with left and right, nothing to do with forward, backward, nothing to do with inside and outside, right? It is refinement, nothing to do with now and then. It is refinement. And this elevation, as we're practicing, can start to feel very, very light. We start to resolve into emptiness, into light. And as we resolve into this emptiness and into this light, this is done through the Akasha. Light becomes understood. Emptiness becomes understood. We keep working through this process, and we begin to find the baselines, we could say, of reality, as well as the harmonics of reality. And we just need to be careful that we don't run from what appears to be dense, right? Because if we have density and we have refinement, then we still are in a state of separation. And we'll get to this more in a following video, how we can avoid getting stuck in running from density, and also avoid getting stuck in deifying density through pride in shadow work and other such things. Okay, so I hope you found this helpful and it was able to unlock some of the intricacies and initiation processes that are baked into this saying, and how this saying is an unlocking and unfoldment of the toroidal field. As above, so below, as within, as all about, as the spirit, so the universe. If you're interested in training, please check out the website. There's a retreat coming up, June 2026, initiation, spheric explorations and evocation, and further refinement and consolidation, online courses, and on it goes. Hope to see you there. Thanks for your time, and see you on the next one. Bye.